So yeah. Uh, First off, how did you go today?
Uh, I had a losing session, not by a lot. I lost rakeless like 45 big blinds. Rakeless raked it was like 80 big blinds, but we go by rakeless anyway. So it's like 45 big blind loss.
Yep, sure. Marcus was telling me about something today. So he saw a hand that he wanted me to review.
Was it the Jack 10 hand?
Uh, don't know, something about Queen Jack 10 Queen or something. Um, what he said.
I had Jack 10 on
Queen Jack 10 full Queen.
Jack 10 Fort Queen. Um,
And King 5. Here we go.
oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about now.
All right, what happened here? Rose call. Check bet raise.
Yeah, I'm aware this is a board that in position can have overbets on. I'm not sure if Jimmy is or if Brandon is using overbets, but it is also a board that out of position does have raises on, mainly centered around King 9 with a little bit of 9-8 as well. And then like I think some two pairs like Queen Jack for like board coverage almost, but yeah, and I give up the river.
Yeah, good. All right, cool. Um, yeah, that's fine. Coin flip.
This one. So on the turn, I think it's probably it's at least a mix, if not a pure call, because I can outdraw all the other two pairs with the king. I do block some draws, but um, in general, I think my hand should call. Um, I think he's slightly more likely to barrel something like 10-9 than king 10 or ace king. So the king isn't as bad as like a 9 or a 10. And it also unblocks like the lower gut shots like 4-3, 5-3, and 5-4. It unblocks the flush draws, which I expect him to barrel at a very high frequency. And that coupled with the fact that I have like okay removal and I outdraw other two pairs, I think it's probably pretty close to. I pure called it on the turn. I did have to think about it, but I did pure call on the turn, and then the river is the real question. Whoever bets the river, um, my hand is indifferent. It's and I was in the blender trying to figure out if he was over bluffing or under bluffing this line. I think his straights should probably just jam. I don't think having a 5 or a 4 here is especially relevant. I think those hands should just like pure shove. As for the king, I would be I wouldn't be super surprised, but like you have so much like 10 high, you have like 10-9, 10-8, that you might not even have to bluff king high here. It is possible that there are some king high bluffs, but it really came down to it's like, okay, is he over bluffing or under bluffing here? I don't know, like, well, he showed up with some pretty retarded hands in the triple barrel line previously. Uh, something something told me he might have it here, but I also wasn't positive if he would take this line with just a naked queen. Obviously, he did. Um, but yeah, it was like, is he under bluffing or over bluffing? And I clicked call because I thought it was likely that he was slightly over bluffing this line.
Cool. And if you weren't sure,
RNG, flip coin.
no, before that,
Blockers. Yeah.
yeah, how are your blockers?
Um, mediocre. I think I honestly think like a 5 or a 4 isn't super relevant. And I also think he's going to be bluffing with a lot of 5s and 4s. Just like he's airballed the turn over bet line quite a bit in some of the showdowns I've seen. So he's going to have hands like, 7-4, 7-5, just like complete dusters that are going to go for it on the river. And I think his straights should choose a bigger size than this as well. And I think he probably would choose a bigger size with his straights. So I think a 5 or a 4 isn't like super relevant. And in fact, it might even be bad because it blocks bluffs. But the king is probably pretty neutral. I think an ace would be slightly better, but at the end of the day, it's not terrible. He could be bluffing with like king 9, king 10, maybe. But yeah, I don't think it's horrible either way. I think it's like just a very close spot in general.
All right, cool. So you thought it was over bluffing, that's fine. And then you evaluate your blockers to be, probably better than average. So both of those tell you it's a call, so you don't really have to flip a coin. And it's not really flipping a coin, it's just, RNG. What do we do on the spreadsheet? Like you can probably see the reason why I set up this up for you the other day.
Yes.
Right? Because like
Yeah, I understand.
when you're in game, these decisions are not, they're not as clear. Like what I mean as coin flip is really just RNG um, versus alpha. So that way, like if you know what alpha is, you'll end up very quickly realizing that you should fold significantly if he makes a really big bet and not fold very much when he makes a small bet.
Yes. Yes.
So if here like alpha is going to be 60%, right? Because he bets, how much did he bet? 1.5 times a pot. So
Yes.
alpha is going to be 60%. So you roll your RNG, and if it's above 60, then you call. If it's below 60, then you fold. But you've got reasons to call, right? You think he's over bluffing, which is the main one, right? Which led you to call, which is fine. And then if you weren't sure about that, then you can evaluate your blockers more, and you think that your blockers are probably better than average, and so you call. But both of which is stronger than the RNG, right? They're higher up in the tree than the RNG.
Oh, this was a retarded hand. I think it was kind of retarded from him.
But call. Check. Bet again. How deep are you to start the hand?
We're, yeah,
125
125.
over call.
I think potting might be fine on the turn, but it's probably
Over
fine either way.
jam.
Jammed on.
Doesn't make any
I think
sense,
the
but
jam is kind of dumb. I don't know if jams are a thing here because like
yeah, probably with some of the ace X, but
yeah,
it doesn't make any sense for him. That's fine. Yeah, it shouldn't. No, we just going through that one.
if I'm barreling like a merged range, it could make sense. If I'm barreling like high equity draws and nutted hands, it can make some sense. But if I'm barreling like air or nutted hands, it generally is like just check.
Weird 3-bet in position on the flop.
Yeah,
That'll happen too much.
I RNG'd the turn because I think barreling my hand with the high club is okay. And then on the river, I'm basically representing a hand like 8-5, ace-8 that wanted to go for the double check raise. But now when the flush comes in, it's a bit too weak to put in more than the pot. Or a flush. Like I'll protect this with some flushes. I'll have like king eight of clubs potentially in here, something like that. He makes a pretty light call, but it's probably a pretty good call. Having the eights really good, arguably better than an ace.
Yeah, so you just got to watch out. This particular line,
Mhm.
check raise flop, check check turn, is very easy to overbluff.
Yeah, I agree with
Um,
that. I wouldn't bluff without a club, and a lot of my better straight draws are gonna barrel turn uh, as well. Like the 6-7 is probably going to do a lot of turn barreling, and then I can
yeah,
double
yeah,
check raise some.
that's not what I'm saying. So like this line in general, like when you check raise a flop and checks from the turn, like, because it's a give up line by you,
Yeah.
apparently, it's incredibly easy to overbluff it,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So I probably want you to check this one on the solver, um, and lines similar to it, like where you check raise flop and checks from the turn, just because you're gonna have so many different like trash hands. Like you really
Mhm.
need to be quite selective with which hands to use as a bluff,
Yeah, I agree with
in
that.
that particular line, because just because you have no value, because like most of it should have bet the turn. I mean, sure you would have some,
Mhm.
right? Like if this was like an offsuit 10 and you've got like one of the sets that was trying to go for a double check raise, you can just like rip the river 6 times a pot or something. But
Mhm.
um yeah.
Yeah, I think on the 10 I even improve to some ace 10 offsuit. There's not very much ace 10 offsuit that doesn't 3-bet preflop, but there's like a tiny bit. And I do have like some two pairs and sets and whatever. I think
Okay. Did you consider overbetting here?
um I noticed I usually don't overbet when out of position can have the nuts and 9-8 being the nuts. I usually save the overbets for the river, but that's very like I think it's a good play. I think having some 150%
Why do you think he can have the nuts? Why do you think he can have 9-8?
I believe it's a limp pot.
Yep, but why do you
So
think he can have 9-8?
uh 9-8 doesn't pure ISO pre. I don't believe. 9-8
9
offsuit.
suited, 9 suited does, and 9 offsuit doesn't.
Yeah.
And then on the flop,
He's gonna check raise a lot of it, but I wouldn't like he's gonna call some as well, I think.
and then you've got a blocker to the 9.
Yes. And I think the heart is good here. It might not be good on the river. Um it's possible that this hand doesn't bluff river just because of the 9 of hearts. It might just always slow down with the 9 of hearts. The five is pretty good. 5-4 completes on the river as well. So there's a bunch of straights. And then thinnest I'd probably go here with the 2x is like king 7, which the solver might not even like, but I would still do it against Brandon because he's like a pretty sick station. There was a hand in here that I deviated. At least I think it was probably a deviation from optimal, just because I thought Brandon was just going to station me with like total bullshit. And he did, which was pretty funny. Called me with like third pair after I triple barreled.
Yeah, sure. I mean the hand you play is fine. This big 4-bet is probably unnecessary.
Yeah, I RNG'd like a 13. So it was
Yeah,
like
but
pretty low
just
frequency.
remember if you go through the preflop stuff, when you open small, you're not really 4-betting big. Really only when you
Yes. Yes.
when you
I
open
agree with
big.
that.
Um, so yeah,
And I do
just
base
watch
my
out for
four
the
bet
next turn.
size. Yeah, I do base my 4-bet size off of the RNG most of the time. Just oh yeah, this was annoying. I also
Why did you do this on the river?
so why did I block bet the river?
Mm-hmm.
So I block bet the turn, I believe, and when I block bet the turn, especially out of position, I generally block bet the river. It's like if I'm essentially representing like Jack 10, Jack 9 on the turn, and so I tend to continue representing those hands on the river, and then that sort of obscures my range to my opponent. Like my hand is obviously worth.
I think you might want to take another look at that line.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think like I know the ace is worth a lot more than this. Um,
So usually you would do this with a hand that um either is what you're representing, which is what like
mhm,
a jack or an eight or something, or a hand that would check raise. I mean 3-bet over the raise, right?
yeah. Mhm.
Like maybe a touch of the straight, some of the two pairs. You wouldn't really do this with an ace. Like with an ace, you could just pot it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look at it. And then against the Rays, I RNG'd some 3-bets. I think the 5 is
Yeah, I mean it's difficult because you put yourself in this sort of spot, right? Versus
yeah, I think
if you had Potter and then he makes the same size raise, it would be much more like a fold. But because you've gone so small and now you
mhm,
block a lot of his ace x two pairs, um,
yeah. I think three
like
betting the river is actually like I RNG'd some river 3-bets just due to the fact that yeah, I blocked the aces up. And then I think it's a lot more he has a straight that contains a 5 if he does have a straight. Because he didn't bet the flop. So the flop checked through. And so that removes almost all of the 10-9 from his range. And so if he does get to the river, it's probably 9-5 or 5-4. And 5-4 can call the
yeah.
original
I mean
turn.
flop check through and the turn he just called, so he doesn't have 10-9.
Oh, this one. This was frustrating. I'm like, he's just gonna call me, isn't he? And then he called me with king high. He's like tanking it down. I'm like, oh, he never tank folds. But I still think my play is good. I don't have a heart, which basically makes it a mandatory bluff, I think.
Did you consider betting smaller on the river or bigger on the river?
Um, I think I think potting it is essentially what my queens want to do. Maybe they go even bigger. It's possible that like going 150 here is
What about
better.
the hands other than a queen?
Um, hmm, trying to
Right?
think.
Because you
Because
you've opened, so you're going to have all the pocket pairs through to aces, right? And they're all going to
yeah.
be taking this on the line. Like if you have fives or sixes,
Mhm,
right, he's also got fives and sixes, and like you block all of that. So like that's probably like the hand that maybe you want to rep.
mhm. Yeah, I think obviously you can bet a 4 on the river. It might not pot it it.
What
It's
what I'm
probably, it could
saying
probably
is what I'm
buy it.
saying is what are you doing with pocket fives? What are you doing with pocket sixes?
Yeah.
Because when
So
you're
so
when
the
you're
question is like, do I
considering when
trip
you're
out?
considering using a hand like this as a bluff, like
Mhm.
you should immediately think to use the same hand that your blockers have because it helps with the range construction. It might not always be correct, but it's easy that way,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point. That's a good
So
point.
like here you've got 6-5. Okay, well I block pocket sixes, I block pocket fives, and I can reasonably rep them on the river, right?
Yeah.
So what size would pocket sixes bet? What size would pocket fives bet? They'll probably bet the same size, right? What size
Yeah,
would that
probably
be?
like 60% pot. I'd probably go
Okay,
around 60% pot.
probably makes more sense to bet that particular size with this hand.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fine.
so it's one of those tricks that you should be using when you're looking at bluffs, right? You should be looking at your hand, look at what its blockers have, and see if you can use those blockers to represent anything in your own value range, and then allocate that blocker that bluff according to its blockers, according to the size that those hands want to use. So like,
Okay.
sure, you can do this with a queen, like queen six, queen five, but like it's easier with hands like pocket sixes, pocket fives,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of queen X,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of pocket sixes, pocket fives, so it's a lot easier to represent those particular hands.
Mhm.
And then you just like blow them off a lot of naked king X, and I mean the fact that he's got a
Good
three
think.
is a bit is the fact that he's got a three is a bit is like really loose because that's a really negative blocker for him because you could be reasonably turning a three into a bluff now. Like if you have deuce three, three five,
Yeah, yeah,
three
yeah.
six, because all of those have been counterfeit.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I'll think about that sizing trick. The ace is a good card when you bet 1/3, but it's a bad card when you bet big. And King High does have like a tiny bit of showdown, I think.
yeah, like I mean, a lot of the time when you have those hands with a touch of showdown value or almost no showdown value, like those hands really just get put there because they're put into the check fold range because they block folds. Like that they're blocking your opponent's folds with a king X.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
So you can't bluff them, and also like they kind of force your opponent to bluff a hand that's weaker than you. Otherwise, you
Mhm.
just value own them from the flop. Um, yeah, that's good. Um, actually, I don't think about it.
Okay.
There is a
Do you jam
possibility of just
river?
like ripping the river, but
Mhm.
given the fact that there's so many draws here, you could just take a showdown.
I think. Yeah, it does have like a little bit of showdown against like there are like a lot of draws that brick. So it might have enough showdown to like profitably check. It also has really good blockers at the same time. You block the rivered king three, and you block the 7/5, which could reasonably call turn. Yeah, it was a spot, but I did feel like I had enough showdown to not have to bluff this one. It's like a plus EV check back, so don't have to put into a 0 EV bluff.
It's
Full
weird how
screen.
he just calls. Yeah, I don't get that. You should have lost a lot more there. Like you should just rip the river.
I think like a small river raise is probably the move from him. I think the call is
The call is horrendous.
very
I think he
nitty.
should have raised.
He
Um,
must have had like a read on me that is like, better not put in any more money. Mm,
okay, 2.5. Right.
yeah. Another one of these. I think ripping river is actually like a like very reasonable here. Just because of like the sheer number of straights that complete, because I have 7/4 offsuit and he I don't think he does. Was this a 2.1 open?
No, this
Um,
is all. Oh yeah, 2-1.
yes, small. Well, he still doesn't have 7-4 by the river because that folds flop. Um, so like I have a bunch of 7-4, a bunch of 9-7, 4-2 suited, and then I have all like the sets and two pairs and whatever. I think taking this one and sending it is actually is probably a bit better because the five doesn't have any showdown value here because it's such a dry board. So I think blocking the two pairs and blocking the straight is probably enough reason to put it in. Uh,
Yeah. Okay. So you should look that one up in the solver. So if so whenever you identify a mistake or or
mhm.
something that you think could be a mistake, just look it up in the solver. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Um.
So here it felt like I was floating every single backdoor flush draw or almost on the flop. When he checks me on the turn, I do have some showdown value. Like I have a bunch of just like straight garbage and like low straight draws that I can bluff with. And then on the river, it doesn't feel necessary to turn this particular king high into a bluff. I might turn another king high into a bluff, but it is like a nut king high. And I decided to check it back.
Yeah. Usually not king highs, especially on a paired board, has got like, loads of showdown value. Okay. So call, check over bet, call.
I thought about raising the turn. I just didn't know what to do against jam, and King Jack has a little bit of showdown value in the check line. If the river's like a 10 and he checks back like 7-5 or something, uh, here it's like, yeah, just ditching it on the river.
Yeah. I want you to look this one up. Do you consider donking the river?
Yeah, I thought about talking the river. The problem is I don't think he has enough. I don't think he has enough like ace high. I think he just has like a bunch of pairs. And so like I don't hate talking the
Yeah. So
river.
that's not really the reason why. That's not the reason why.
Okay. Yeah.
Like you don't necessarily have to fold out better hands when you're dunking the river. Like when you're bluffing here, it's like not necessarily the case. You have to fold out better hands because like worse hands you check they're going to bluff into you anyway, right? So
Oh,
like
I see.
here you're out of position. You go for a tiny river donk. It's actually sometimes to fold out worse to prevent him from bluffing you, um,
Hmm.
or about betting into you, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So like that's part of where your EV comes from.
Okay.
Because like if you make a small bet and he doesn't raise properly and have proper raises, and this comes back to the ace king
I
queen of
think
thing,
I
right?
think that might be a
Where you
leak from
can
him.
where you can actually bet a king at low frequency in order to force him to raise a hand that's worse. I mean, not this is necessarily like a bluff catcher, but like if you make a small donk, it's like a bluff semi bluff, like, and he just folds everything that was bluffing the turn, you end up realizing essentially
Mhm.
um everything on the river. So it's one of the river small donk line is definitely something that you should look into, especially after you've called an overbet on the previous street.
Mhm.
Like whenever there's an overbet on the previous street, the donk line on the next street is incredibly important to learn, and
Mhm.
it's incredibly important to know.
Yeah, there
Um,
was a situation like that. There was one today and there was one the other day. Uh, I think I had second pair in the one that happened today. 10 something. But I had like 9 high in the one that happened yesterday. Called the river, didn't I? This was a delay C bet line, right?
yep, check bet call, check bet.
Yeah. I mean, It's one of those like, yeah, it's indifferent. Is he over bluffing or under bluffing? I didn't think he would put a queen into the size. I was wrong. Yeah, I think a queen definitely can go this size, but I wasn't sure if he would take it with his queen X, and I thought his king X would bet bigger. So I thought perhaps the size that he used here was slightly over bluffed. And so I decided to put in the call. I think my hand is also a little bit better to call than like 9-7 of hearts, because I think he's more likely to not bluff with miss spades here. It's probably bluffing with a lot of like, 10-5, 10-6 type hands, or 9-5, 9-6. Like the 9 isn't great, but it's not terrible, I think. The 7 is not bad. But
so the 9 blocks bluffs. He's betting less in the pot, so blocking bluffs becomes more important.
yes.
And you thought he was over bluffing, that's why you called.
Yes.
Okay, cool. And if you're unsure, your blocker would be so your blocker would be
blocker would be probably
this
bad.
one is probably bad. Okay, so it would be more of a fold. So when those two decisions are like counter to each other, like you have to be much more sure in the first decision that he's over bluffing. But him over bluffing trumps the blocker being bad, right?
Yes.
That's why I put it earlier in the decision tree. So it's fine that you called. You thought it was over bluffing. So probably some whenever this happens, like you thought he was over bluffing, right? And you get it wrong, you should also check that in the solver, just so that
Yes.
you're sure that you truly understand the line. And like you said that you didn't think that he would value bet a queen, and you were wrong. So like
size.
yeah. But whenever he does something that you don't expect,
yeah, update.
right? You need to update that spot. Okay, it could be the case where he's right and you're wrong, or you're right and he's wrong. Either way, you have to find out.
Yes, I agree. What's this?
Okay. So it's a limp pot.
Yes.
He bets, doesn't raise with the ace.
Yes.
Okay, so the fact that he's not raising with the ace here, it's probably saying that like he feels that you over barrel.
Yes.
And like he's exploited you here.
I think I sort of sensed that throughout today. I got the vibe that because there were some hands that went to showdown. There were some hands that I chose not to bluff that I usually would have bluffed. That I just sort of got the vibe that he was like trying to trap me a bit more, and felt I was going to blast off a bit too often. So I sort of toned that down a bit later today. This one I think is probably fine though. We unblock the hearts. We have 5 high. It's not out of the question that he would call turn with like 7-8 or 7-5. So like this feels like a pretty mandatory bluff. IRNG'd pretty low as well. I generally
But before that, do you do this with pocket fives, pocket threes?
No.
Okay. What do you do with pocket fives and pocket threes?
Check behind.
Okay, so in that case, do you want to pick a different size of this hand?
No, I think I would mostly bet half pot here. Like I think half pot might be my only sizing on this turn after checking back the flop.
Cool.
And then on the river, I can have like quite a few sixes, especially the stronger sixes are gonna delay quite a bit for protection. So I decided to represent having a 6 on the river. And he actually tanked for quite a while with the ace, which I thought was interesting. He tanked
Yeah, snap
probably
that off.
into his time bank. But he did call. Oh, this one. This is a river decision. I think betting turn is also okay. Like bet like 1/3 or 1/2 on the turn. And then on the river, I considered the possibility that raising this would be okay. Like blocking pocket jacks is, I think, probably a pretty significant factor. Also, blocking the nut flush is good. But I felt as though against the quarter pot, I just had like a very plus EV call as well. So
Yeah, so you feel like you got a plus EV call because he's representing a jack? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I felt like in the quarter pot size, he could have a jack or a king.
Okay, so that's all you need. That's all you need. You don't need to think about it more. Right. Well, when you consider bluff raising, you want to bluff raise a hand that's much closer to zero.
Yeah. I thought about it. If I was going to bluff raise it, I was probably going to send it in. And when the way I
No,
was thinking about it
the
was,
thing is, like, you're thinking about, ripping the river with a hand that's a plus EV call. So, like, you need like a significant reason to do that.
yes. So the reason I was thinking about ripping this hand and that this might be an okay hand to rip river with was because it would be such a big jam that like the blocking effects of the jack are probably pretty significant. But it's like I could also just rip like jack four. I don't think I'd ever rip king four,
Okay.
just due to the
The
fact
the
that
next
it's
question
like so.
is the next question is why are you going to have 5x pot rips in position?
Mm. So what might justify a 5x pot river jam is if he's unwilling to three bet me enough, essentially. So if he's not three bet bluffing me at all, then my value bets don't get paid as much um, when I go smaller. And so the hands that, and so to exploit someone who doesn't three bet the river enough, which 95% of players I've played against, I don't know if Brandon's doing it, but I don't know for sure if Brandon's doing it. But essentially, if they're not three betting the river enough, then I should have a very big size, and the smaller size can be left a little bit less protected. That would be the reason. I'm not sure if that's valid in this
Okay,
very
and then
specific
which
instance.
which hands take that line?
Jack nine, mostly. Also, pocket fours could check back the turn when the flush completes and the straights complete. And also king nine. So I would be representing a boat. But I also think the nut flush blocker is relevant because I don't think Brandon would basically ever fold the nut flush to a jam in this spot after block betting the river. So it just comes down to the blocker effects. And I think the jack is a lot better than the four because I don't think he's ISOing fours very often. So it's like just due to the fact that his calling range would be so tight, I think the jack is like a significantly better blocker than pretty much anything else. So if I did choose to jam the river,
So yeah, what you should probably do is just run this spot in the solver. I mean, I'm
I
unconvinced,
did.
and I think maybe you're just overthinking
Yeah,
maybe a touch. You should run the spot in a solver. Like if you're convinced that he's under bluffing, like because you've laid out this argument and like it relies on a lot of assumptions about what he's doing. So
yes.
first off, like at equilibrium, probably not 5x river jams. Like it's just going to be like a raise, and then he's going to rip into you, and then you're going to call with like the super nuts. Like he bets the size. He's repping a jack or a king. Like you can raise with a nine. You can raise smaller with a nine. You can raise smaller with a flush, right? And in both the situations, like he rips over the top with the full house, and when you got a full house, you just snap it off. Um,
Mhm.
so he should be, three bet jamming with full houses and bluffs, and that's how your full houses get value, and then your flushes are going to be indifferent, and then like your nines are going to be like folding. Um,
I
so
agree. And in game, I did decide to pure call with ace jack with the ace of diamonds.
yeah. So we already went through that bit, but I was just trying to explore your thought process. So that thought process seems a bit. It seems a bit loose, right? So like I would strongly suggest that you look it up in a solver and sort of reevaluate that, because
Okay.
the reason why I go through like your thought process so much is because it's the thought process that leads to mistakes, and if we can correct as many of unnecessary processes, then like we will minimize the amount of mistakes that you're making, right? Like the fact that you're making this thought about potentially jamming the river with a
Mhm.
hand that's already very very plus EV call, means that you're opening up yourself to potential mistakes of magnitude of 125 big blinds, right?
Yes,
Does
that's if
does
you
does does
pure
that make
calls.
sense?
Yeah, I agree.
Well, not necessarily with this hand. Like he could have had the set of kings, um, right?
Yes.
So we're opening up like very large mistakes because you're making these sorts of thoughts with this hand.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
and also the fact that probably at equilibrium it's not a thing means that you're opening up. It's like you're opening up a can of worms that you don't need to. Um,
Mhm.
and because you're doing that, sometime in the future you could be opening up a can of worms and then acting on it and making a large mistake because of it. And this is why like I'm very I analyze your thoughts a lot. All right, like you might not think that I am, but I'm analyzing the way that you're thinking, not what you're saying.
Mhm.
Okay, because
Yeah.
the way that you're
I would.
thinking is going to either lead to a mistake or it's going to either lead to the correct decision. Most of the time, it's leading to the correct decision, which is great, but sometimes it's leading to a lot of unnecessary action on or unnecessary, um, basically unnecessary thought where you don't need to be thinking about this stuff. It's going to be like, you're going to start eating up in your time bank and like do a bunch of weird shit that
Mhm.
isn't particularly necessary. Like you're going to lose time bank. You're going to open yourself up to mistakes by having thoughts that you don't need to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. On the river, I was just like the reason I went through that thought process was essentially like I was trying to think of, okay, what hands do I get to this spot with that I would turn into a bluff, and what kind of blockers would I want to make some sort of bluff raise? What size would I want to go on that bluff raise? How does the size influence which blockers are best? And I was thinking like, well, if I do want to have a jam, this hand is probably like a pretty good hand to do it with. Um, and I'm like, do I really want to have a jam? It's not that. It's probably a plus EV call against the quarter pot. I have like decent removal for a bluff raise, but I also have like a very plus EV call. So at the end of the day, I'm just gonna pure call this hand, and not potentially lose EV. That was like
Yeah.
sort of.
So your thoughts are wandering around a lot there. I mean, once you recognize it as a plus EV call,
Mhm.
right? You keep your hand over the call button, and you can double check that it's a plus EV call, and then click the call button. Right. That's all you have to do, right? Um.
Yes, but there are a
So
lot of
so
spots
so
where
so you
plus
so
EV
you,
calls
you
are.
yeah,
Um,
they're also partial raises. Um.
mhm.
And we can go over that, but you have to think about it a lot more. And it's usually the case, especially when you're facing a small size like this.
Mhm.
that it's the hands that are much closer to 0 EV are the ones that are being used as bluff raises.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree with that.
so and that's a case on the river, just like in general. Like if you're considering using a hand as a bluff raise, like you should be putting it sort of inside this decision tree here, right? Like
Yeah.
probably towards the end. Like you can think about, good blockers. Like if it's really good, then you can call or raise, right? Like good blockers slash check release, like call slash raise, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
that's
I
that's
agree.
that's that, that that's the sort of way you need to put it, like over bluffing, under bluffing.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny you say that because that's essentially what I did here. It was like, okay, is it a,
No. So here is indifferent. No, that's it. So the decision should have been is indifferent. No, because you beat some of the jack X, or at least chop with king jack. It's a block a lot of like sorry, yeah, chop with his ace jack. Um, so that's where the decision tree arises. Why the decision tree helps, like if one, it speeds up a lot of your thoughts, so you don't like eat into time back unnecessarily, right? If you spent like you got 15 seconds for free, and then you start eating up on your time bank. You spend 20 seconds on this hand. You get well on the bluff raise it. Like you've wasted 5 seconds of your time bank, which could have spent, in a better spot. Like is it indifferent? No, next
I
hand.
did go through this like very quickly in my head. Like I know
Yeah,
it
yeah,
takes me
good,
like
good,
a
good.
minute to tell you, but I do go through
Indifferent,
like the thought
indifferent,
process pretty
indifferent,
quickly.
indifferent. Yes, and then a bluffing. I'm sure, and then this unit to raise is a potential when you've got good blockers. Um,
Uh,
the the
would you
the
mind
the
if
point
I
the point
check?
the point that yeah, so definitely make sure that you take a look at that in the solver, and you can send it to me afterwards, because we don't like, unlike the weekends during the week, we don't usually have that much time.
Mhm.
Uh so definitely check in your own time, and then we'll get back to it. So like a lot of these, the reason why, like, I'm trying to make sure that you're having a good, logical thought process, is that we're trying to minimize the amount of mistakes and potential mistakes that you could be making. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that you're making the mistakes. I'm not saying that your thought process, that your thoughts are wrong. I'm saying your thought process is disordered, right? And then because it's
Okay.
disordered, it can lead to you overvaluing one component over another and leading to the incorrect conclusion,
Mhm.
right? But if you order it in a way that is correct, then certain things earlier in your thought process should lead to a more correct answer before considerations later on, which are
So
much closer
with
to
regards to
zero EV.
with regards to the previous hand, the ace jack, I did recognize that it was an indifferent call, or not, sorry. I did recognize that it was a plus EV call, but I also recognized, given the blocking effects of the cards, it was very, very likely a plus EV jam as well. Or not a jam, plus EV raise. Uh I felt as though there was a possibility that it was indifferent at equilibrium between calling and raising, not folding, but calling and raising, um, just due to the blocking effects of it. That said, I came to the conclusion after going through the thought process that I'm not going to risk making a very large mistake here. I'm just going to call.
Yeah, you should take a look at that in the solver. The point is that, like, the way that you get there takes a fair amount of time, and then you're opening yourself up to that mistake in the first place, because, like, once you get there, once you get from you realizing that is not indifferent, right? Like, you realize it's not indifferent, you call, like, great, and then, like, you've diverted yourself down a line that is potentially quite dangerous. You could open yourself up to large mistakes.
I trust myself to
So
eventually come to the right conclusion in these spots. So like if I go down a certain thought
yeah, no,
process,
no.
I trust
So so
myself to not be
so
like, okay,
so
well,
so
I've
so
gone down this thought
usually
process.
usually you shouldn't. So we'll probably need to restructure it. Usually you shouldn't do that. Because when you get to the spot where you're tired, right? You're playing a little bit off. Something weird happened yesterday. and you follow the same structure, that's when you open yourself up to big mistakes. And I'm trying to avoid that. And I'm
I
not saying
understand.
I'm not saying that your call was wrong, that you should have raised. I'm not saying that raising is wrong either. I'm saying is that the way that you're thinking in the future could lead to you making significant errors unnecessarily. So I want to avoid that. Okay. And so like when you're thinking about using a bluff raise,
Mhm.
unless there's an incredibly good reason to just stick to the indifferent hands, the hands that you know are closer to indifferent. Um,
I felt it. I know it's not zero EV, but I felt it was potentially. So the reason I went through it was because I felt it was potentially indifferent between call and raise. I recognize that it was plus EV, but I recognize that it was potentially indifferent. And so that's when I started going through the process of, okay, where are my bluff raises coming through in this spot? What hands would I want to bluff raise? What sort of frequency am I looking at? How liberal with my hand selection should I be for these bluff raises? What blockers are good? And I went through all that in like 10 seconds. And I came to the conclusion that, it does have very good blockers, but it's such a plus EV call that I'm just gonna pure call it here.
yeah. Okay. So like you see how like once you get to here, it's zero EV. And then if you start thinking about raising, you're starting off from a point where your hand was zero EV to begin with, or close to zero EV to begin with, but here it's not. So like once you have a plus EV call, like a very plus EV call, um, usually you just call, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Almost all the
I
time.
usually do.
But
I usually
here,
do. I understand.
once you have a hand that's very close to zero EV, then you can think about racing. Then it's a possibility that raises are actually plus EV compared to calling,
Mhm.
because calling is close to zero EV to begin with. This is when you should really start thinking about having the raises, right?
Yes. I
So
also do consider whether I think Brandon is going to overfold the spot to a raise. I think
yeah,
it's
but you
possible
can
that
do
he's
it. You
been
can do it out of the
overfolding.
subset of hands that are indifferent,
Um,
because there's going to be a lot of hands
that's
that are
that's
like that.
that's generally where I pick my raises from, unless there's some extenuating circumstance, like really really good blockers or something like that. But like I think we're on the same page. We're on the same page. We're saying the same things.
No, I'm not saying the same thing. What I'm saying is that you shouldn't think about having the raise in this line. Okay, like
I should not.
once it's a very plus EV call, like it's unnecessary. Like even though it might happen in GTO at low frequency, like it's completely unnecessary. Like you can look at it in the solver and you'll probably see that it happens 5% of the time or something. But
I trust
I don't think
myself
it's
to
necessary.
not make to be able to think about the spot at a high level and not make tremendous mistakes with hand selection with the lines that I choose to take.
That's the problem, right? Like a lot of the time, you should not be
How's
trusting
that a
yourself.
problem? Wait.
So
The problem is that I
what
trust
when you're
myself not to make mistakes when
yeah
I critically
yeah
think about a certain
yeah
spot.
yeah
That's the problem, that I trust myself
yeah
in river spots.
yeah
That's a significant problem.
yeah.
That's
So
that's
that's a
that's like
problem. So
a critical.
a lot of your thinking happens subconsciously, right? And so it's bubbling up to the surface, and then your conscious thoughts need to monitor your subconscious. It's very difficult too, because like a lot of your subconscious is just happening in the background. Most of the stop sharing for here. Most of the brain power that you have happens in the subconscious layer. All right. your conscious thoughts need to monitor your subconscious to make sure that your subconscious isn't getting out of line. All right. Your subconscious has multiple different parts of it that are thinking simultaneously in parallel. Okay. Your conscious needs to monitor your subconscious to make sure that your subconscious doesn't lead you to make a mistake. One part of your subconscious could be yelling at you to raise, another part of your subconscious could be yelling at you to call. And the fact that your conscious is listening to one over the other leads you to make the raise versus leads you to make the call. So your conscious needs to distrust the subconscious because subconscious has got an immense amount of computing power behind it, right? Like your brain is a supercomputer. Okay, once you understand it, your brain is a supercomputer, but you don't access any of that. You don't have direct access to any of the supercomputing power that your brain actually has. You don't have direct access to it. You're just monitoring it. Right? You're just looking at it the same way that we're looking at a screen, right? Like we're looking at the screen at the moment. We don't see all the computing power in the CPU that's flowing through it. The same way that our conscious mind doesn't see all the immense computing powers flowing through the subconscious. Okay. So what I'm saying is that you shouldn't trust yourself. Like in a lot of these spots, it's better to not trust a fleeting thought, a fleeting thing that's coming out of the subconscious that's bubbling to the surface, because that fleeting thing that is going against the grain, you need to seriously double check that, because that's where it leads to mistakes.
I'm not that impulsive,
Default decision. Yeah, I'm not saying that you're impulsive, but everybody, when they're tired, when shit happened yesterday, when shit happened this morning, you lose a hand, 3 minutes before, that's when shit happens, right? It's when your conscious mind gets distracted by something that happened previously. You lose control of your subconscious and your thoughts go slightly astray, right? What I'm trying to get through to you. So
when I say I trust myself to monitor my thoughts, take the input from my thoughts, rationally decide based on what you call the fleeting thoughts, and bring it to like the forefront of my conscious and critically think through the spot. Just because the thought that a bluff raise crossed my mind doesn't mean I'm susceptible to making a tremendous error in a spot because the thought crossed my mind, and now I'm going to click raise because the thought crossed my mind. Thoughts come into my brain, I analyze them, I attempt to weigh the EVs of different actions and weigh the inputs of these fleeting thoughts in my head to arrive at the best conclusion about what to do in a hand.
Yeah, good. So that's what you've been doing in the past, and it's worked for you so far. But what I'm saying is that this challenge, it's very important to not make mistakes. And so while you can afford to make mistakes when you're playing six max and you're playing against significantly weaker players than Brandon, and you have an unlimited amount of time, an unlimited amount of hands to catch up and to go over the mistakes and check things again and never make that mistake again, right? Later on.
Yes.
You can do that when you're not playing against a very strong player with a limited number of hands to win. All right. So these things are probably good for your, long-term thinking about the game. But right now we're trying to maintain your edge, limit the amount of mistakes that you're making, right? It's better to reconstruct things in a way that limits the amount of mistakes that you're making while still causing you to play super sharp. We've already got a pre-flop strategy and a flop strategy that's very sharp, and Brandon's already behind. He's already on the back foot, right? I'm trying to prevent you from making big mistakes later on in the game tree by reanalyzing your thought process, because these big mistakes later on in the game tree, I don't have control over in terms of constructing your strategy for them, right? And you don't have a lot of control over them either, because these mistakes later in the game tree, They're going to happen rarely, and they're going to happen randomly, and they're going to happen just after you lose a big pot, right? And you'll feel a bit strange or whatever, and you'll end up making the wrong play. Okay, so I want to avoid these because these are the things that are going to cause you to potentially lose significant amounts of money, right? They might only happen once every 1,000 hands, but once every 1,000 hands, you lose a full buy-in, right? Because of a bad call, a bad jam, something like that. That's what causes you to lose the challenge unnecessarily, right? You can make that 1 in 1,000 mistake when you're not playing a fixed number of hands against a strong player, all right? Because you can afford the time to get your money back. But with the stakes that you're playing, you can't afford these mistakes now. You understand what I'm saying? And so why I'm going through all your thoughts in very, very high detail is to try to avoid unnecessary mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I'm trying to avoid the big ones. A hand where it's already a very plus EV call when you've decided that, and then you start thinking about, turning into a bluff raise jam. You're opening yourself up to an unnecessary mistake that you didn't have to even think about making. And then, so in the future,
what do you think the magnitude of the mistake is? Like
the
mistakes that you're talking
magnitude,
about
the magnitude of the potential mistake, right?
Because the magnitude of the mistake isn't like if I make a mistake and I lose a stack, the mistake wasn't the magnitude of the mistake was not a full stack, right? It was like, a 2 big blind mistake or something, a 3 big blind mistake. Like I bluff a hand that he's given my blockers for the bluff. Brandon is going to slightly over defend against in terms of he's going to slightly over defend against MDF because my hand had bad blockers. And so I made a bad mistake. I lost a stack, but the magnitude of the mistake is like a couple big blinds. It's not like the full stack. Like I'm not making very many mistakes here. Like I'm analyzing my play. I'm sending the hands through GTO Wizard. It's not that bad. In terms of like heads up play, I'm playing like very well. And my thought process is leading me to analysis of the situations I find myself in. Like very, very sharp analysis of the situations I find myself in, just because I'm analyzing.
So I'm not talking about this hand. I'm talking about all the potential hands that you could play in the future. So we're what, like four and a bit thousand hands in. So you still got over 20,000 hands left. So that's 21,000 possible hands where you could make large mistakes. I'm trying to minimize all of these. So you're getting quite defensive now. I'm not saying that you're a bad player, all right? That's not the case. I'm saying that you
reconstruct my entire thought process.
No. I'm not trying to reconstruct.
Thought about hands.
I'm not trying to reconstruct your thoughts. I'm trying to limit your risk. Limit your own risk to yourself. Okay. The reason why you're in this challenge in the first place is got to do with an ego thing. Both you and Brandon have very large egos. All right. I used to have a particularly large ego myself, which is why I got into a tiff with Brandon in the first place. So I understand where you're coming from. What I'm saying now is that when you're working with me and when you're trying to win this challenge, you need to push your ego to the side a bit when you're trying to focus on things logically. Your thought process has gotten you here so far. All right, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is still up for debate. We'll get to the end of the challenge and then we can look back on things and decide. In the meantime, I want you to limit your risk. You're already ahead in the challenge. All right. So making yourself do things that are unnecessarily risky, unnecessarily increasing your variance, is going to cause you to make large losses. So even though the mistake might feel like, it could potentially only be 2-3 big blinds in EV, right? In terms of the actual risk, the tail end risk, it's plus 125, minus 125, right? And that's what I'm trying to get through to you is like, if it's unnecessary for you to take a very risky line, right, when you're already ahead, you don't have to. And plus, like, it's probably not even there's probably not even any raised jams at equilibrium in the first place. So like you go through the decision tree, right? You're facing this bet, indifferent, yes, no. And then you take raises out of the hands that are close to 0 EV. By default, you're already going to make slightly better decisions because like raising can suddenly be plus EV. Because usually raising is very close to EV. given the fact that you don't know your opponent is overbluffing, underbluffing, right? Because once it's overbluffing, underbluffing, right, and you decide to call or fold based on that, all right, that's enough to pick up EV from any mistakes he's making with his range construction. After that, when you're not sure, then certain hands can become plus EV, minus EV for bluff raises because you're not sure about his range constructions. You're not sure whether it's overbluffing, underbluffing. Then you have to start thinking about whether it's overcalling, undercalling against a raise. All right. Then it's another subtree that we haven't really gone into. But you really have to get there with a hand that's already plus EV to call, where you don't have to risk a huge amount. So you're already ahead in the challenge. I don't want you to take unnecessary risk to increase your standard deviation, right? We just want you to play like super solid between now and the end of the challenge. And we do that by eliminating unnecessary large risks, unnecessary variance in the game. Okay. You're 4,000 hands in, right? What's that, like 16% of the way through the challenge? You're up. How many buy-ins? 22 buy-ins? Okay.
Just under 23.
Yeah, 23 buy-ins. We keep playing solid, right? Minimize unnecessary risk. You're still going to take a risk, right? The game is inherently risky. We're minimizing unnecessary risks, minimizing unnecessary mistakes, and just lock it up, right? There's going to be loads of spots in the future where there's going to be exploits, but those exploits can happen a lot earlier in the game tree.
Oh. Hey.
All right. Earlier in the game tree, which we're already doing. Already doing a lot of exploits pre-flop, and he's already seems to be struggling with it. So if he's struggling with the early parts of the game tree, by default, you're winning. Okay. And so you don't have to take unnecessary risk later on to pick up, this is like picking up pennies in front of a train, right? What's the thing? Train tracks, pick up pennies on the train tracks when the train's about to come, right? Unnecessary. Like you've already got the $100 bill at the train station in terms of pre-flop, right? Which he's underplaying. He's playing pre-flop poorly. We know that, so we're going to continue exploiting them there, and then it leads to cleaner decisions later on. So I want you to be making very solid decisions on the river where you going through and checking yourself for mistakes rather than trying to squeeze out every little ounce of EV in some of these river decisions, right? Because it's usually unnecessary.
So essentially,
these river decisions end up being particularly high risk. What I'm telling you is that we're going to solidify your thought process later on in the tree so that you don't make large mistakes, you don't take large unnecessary risk, and then you just let the pre-flop strategy and the flop strategy that we've been working on to exploit Brandon essentially shine through. I'm not saying that you're a bad player or you can't do these things. I'm saying that this stuff is this unnecessary sort of superfluous thought about the spot is not needed for you to win the challenge and can potentially open yourself up to losing.
Okay. Do you understand that the unnecessary risk you describe is a thought and not an action?
Yeah. But thoughts are always preceded by action, and action and thought are essentially the same thing. And then when you're in a bad spot, when your thought process is slightly wrong, when you're slightly emotional, when you've lost 2-3 big hands in a row, that's when the mistakes happen. And I'm trying to prevent that from happening because they will happen. All right. We're going good so far. I don't want you to, have lost 3 stacks and then because of you being slightly emotional, lose the 4th stack. That's what I'm preventing. Right.
I need you to trust me to make the right decisions on turn and river. Like you need to trust that I'm capable of analyzing, and you need to trust that my current thought process, which has gotten me this far, I'm playing extremely well. If you analyze the hands objectively, there are very few mistakes and very few big mistakes. There's like very small EV mistakes like sizing errors and whatever that occasionally happen. But in terms of like the very big mistakes that you're describing, like 10 big blind mistakes or 15 big blind mistakes.
Yeah, those don't actually usually exist at equilibrium, unless like you make something horrendous, like you forget to
unless you
bluff
call
river and a gut blind. Like those aren't going to happen, right? What I'm saying is that these mistakes that seem relatively small, there might be 2, 3, 4, 5 big blinds. They usually come with a lot of additional risk in terms of the tail end distribution, right? So they're massively swingy. Okay. Yeah. So it's usually unnecessary to take them, even think about them. Like here, like this is just an example of one where like you've got a solid like lock it up plus EV call, right?
I feel like
what is the EV? What is EV there? Maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 big blinds out of 25 big blind pot. What is the mistake potential EV mistake of like ripping in? Maybe it's only 2, 3 big blinds, but it opens yourself up to the swing of minus 125 and then plus 25, right? So it's a very tail heavy distribution, and usually with a lot of negative tail end distributions, there's like anxiety involved, because that's really what anxiety is. It's like you should be negatively valuing this minus 125 versus the plus 125, even if the EV is somewhere in the middle.
This could have been significantly shortened to just say, don't take very high variance plays at a very high frequency. Like make high variance plays that are good at a lower frequency versus equilibrium strategy. I feel like that's a general summary of what we've been through the past 15 minutes or so. Like you have to.
What I'm saying is that you seem to be going out of your own way in order to think about them. All right, I'm trying to minimize that.
I need to trust that I can think a thought without immediately acting on it and making a mistake. Like I can think a thought, I can analyze the thought. Is this thought a mistake? And then I can move on. Just because the thought enters my head doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to make a terrible mistake. You have to be able to trust me to like think critically about the spot, think whatever thoughts I need to think to come to the right conclusion, and then act in accordance with what I believe is the best decision.
Yeah, no, sorry. I can't do that.
You can't trust me to think my own thoughts.
No, because you're human, everybody makes mistakes. All right.
You're asking me to not be human.
Yeah. This is why we're looking through things so critically with the solver, right? I'm asking you to try to think in a way that minimizes the amount of mistakes that you're making, right? Because you're going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes, and I'm trying to minimize the amount of potential mistakes that you're making, because you're already in a position where you're significantly far ahead.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're trying to minimize unnecessary risk, and we're doing a lot of error checking. Okay, because it's going to get to the stage where it's later on in the challenge, you're potentially having a downswing, right? And then because you're having a downswing, you're getting emotional, you're getting egotistical, and things start to open up in ways which I cannot predict, and you probably cannot predict. All right, because your brain, okay, the subconscious thoughts that you have available to you, the subconscious processing power that you have available to you is immense. All right. And it's going to, in moments of weakness, take control over your right hand and click the wrong button. Okay. So your conscious thoughts need to be doing all the error checking. Okay. And then letting your subconscious play. All right. But
you're
during the
saying
times when you're feeling emotional, your conscious thoughts have a lot of difficulty doing that. And then your emotional side is going to bias your subconscious, because that's what emotions do. They are a calculation that your brain is performing, which biases all of your subconscious actions into doing one thing over another. So you're going to misvalue certain actions, right, when you're emotional. That's what emotions do. That's what their function is. When you're feeling sad, you do sad things. When you're feeling happy, you do happy things, right? When you're feeling frustrated about a particular spot, you do things out of frustration because your subconscious is weighing the actions differently. And so you're going to perform a miscalculation. And so the conscious thought needs to be continuously checking. Okay.
my conscious thought is continuously checking. Can we move on from this?
The reason why I'm drilling this into you now, well, the reason why I'm drilling this into you now is because you're winning, you're thinking level headed, right? You're calm. All right. When we get to the stage where you've lost 5 buy-ins, 10 buy-ins, 15 buy-ins, right? That's when things are going to be hard. So a little bit of pain now leaves you with a lot less pain later. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Let's move on from this, please.
All right. I'm going to call off now. I want you to go through some of the hands that we talked about and run through the solver. I'm sure you'll find that you played just fine, because you have played just fine.
Okay.
And I drill this stuff into you because I want you to have really solid structure into your thoughts, so that when you're playing slightly emotional, you don't make big mistakes, because everybody makes mistakes when they're emotional. You haven't got to the stage where you're playing emotionally yet. Brandon probably has, where he's played with tilted and made lots of mistakes against you. There's going to be a spot in the future, and I guarantee it, where it's going to be the other way around, where you're playing tilted slightly and you're going to be making mistakes. And I want you to drill into yourself that you can avoid these mistakes by having some structure to your thought process.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because your subconscious is doing everything for you.
Okay.
Yeah. And emotions bias the subconscious. Your
I
brain is a supercomputer. Brain is a supercomputer. Right? Once you understand your brain is a supercomputer and that your emotions bias the calculation that you're making, the only way that you can correct that is by using your conscious thoughts to counter emotions, to keep your subconscious in check, and then use that to continue to make the correct decisions under emotional distress. Yeah. All right, great. You've been doing great so far. Just keep it up. Okay. This seems hard now, and it is, right? This is like going through like psychotherapy and realizing that, you know, a part of your ego is inherently, malaligned with your potential outlook in life. You probably haven't talked to too many therapists before. Maybe you should consider getting one during the challenge, because that will probably help as well. This is going to be a very swingy challenge. Just look up therapists in your area and just sit down with them for like an hour and just like chat about everything, because that will probably help a lot as well. Things are going to get swingy.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
All right, we're good.
We're good.
All right. Keep doing what you're doing. You're playing good so far. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Probably so probably half an hour after you finish the challenge. Yeah, after you finish the challenge each day, we'll probably start. Yeah, and we'll go for about half an hour.
I think I have. That was good.
All right, great. See you then. Bye.